Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you're reaching us from. And welcome to the SSPI webinar, Can Satellite Save the World? Part of our Climate Sense campaign. And I certainly hope that satellite can save the world. First of all, because the world is in need of saving from the climate catastrophe that may be waiting out there for us, but also because climate change represents a very large scale opportunity for the industry that I'm part of and that our panelists will be part of. So we're going to explore in more detail some of the specific ways in which that very large claim can be realized going forward. Could I have the next slide, please? So I said, this is part of what we call the Climate Sense campaign. It's been running for about 4 weeks. And it's consisting of a lot of different media covering the same topic. So we have videos in our Better Satellite World series. We have another webinar like this we did a couple of weeks ago, the New York Space Business Roundtable, focusing on the business issues related to satellite and climate change. We've been producing a weekly podcast for the last 5 weeks, going forward now, called The Planet's on Fire, and they've been quite compelling conversations. This one, the 5th one, is a conversation with NASA former astronaut Nicole Stott, who has her own perspective as well as her own book on the topic. And the reason that we're doing this campaign is because satellite is the only technology that provides perspective on this whole planet. And so we want to look at what those challenges are that we can target, that we can contribute to in terms of both understanding the depth of climate change, but also understanding what can be done about it in some very specific ways. Can I have my next slide, please? I'd like to take a moment just to thank companies that have made this program possible and this entire campaign possible. We call them corporate partners, and they are Access Intelligence, K&L Gates, Northrop Grumman, Hughes and EchoStar, and OneWeb Satellites. And the support they provide to us, as I say, is what makes this program possible. So thanks to them. Next, please. So our agenda for today, we're going to stop hearing from me very shortly and hear from some people who actually got a lot of expertise in this area. Our agenda is focusing on how are we going to understand and how are we going to cope with climate change, and what can satellite do to make a difference in that. So we're going to have a series of 3 very brief presentations, followed by some Q&A to drill into perhaps unanswered questions, because we forced our panelists to be very brief. I'm going to show you very briefly also a Better Satellite World video, which is all about, again, specific applications for satellite technology, in this case, in one of the most climate vulnerable places on Earth, the Arctic. And that'll be followed with a panel discussion to give us a chance to stretch our mental legs a little bit and explore some of the issues in greater depth. And this webinar is being recorded, as you probably heard if you joined us, and it will be available on demand on the Climate Sense webpage. So let's go forward. Our panelists are people who really know this topic from many different angles. We'll be talking and hearing from Morten Hagland Hansen, who's the Vice President for Maritime and Energy at Ursa Space Systems. He has over 25 years of experience in this industry in all kinds of remote communications and information technology. He's worked for companies from INET and SES to O3B Networks and RigNet, so he knows his stuff. Joining him is Guillermo Bosch, who is Senior Vice President for Business Development for General Americas, and for some reason I left out the name of his company, which is SatADSL. And that is, he's currently focused on developing and launching an advanced SATCOM service in the Americas that's called Nexus, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about that later on. He also is an extremely experienced person in the business, having worked for Spire Global, Swedish Space Corporation, Signal Horn Trusted Networks, Viasat, and Hughes Network Systems. And finally, we'll be joined by Cristoforo Camporeale, who's the head of Maritime Digital at Inmarsat, which is pushing the boundaries of digitalization at sea, powered, of course, by their platform. He also has spent a decade with Rolls-Royce Marine before joining the company, where he was Vice President Engineering for Motion Handling Solutions and President of Intelligent Asset Management. And so we'll hope that we'll be hearing from a very intelligent person on the topic. Next slide, please. So to begin, I'm going to turn over to Morten to take us through a brief presentation about Ursa Space and how it relates to this particular topic. So Morten, over to you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for having me on today. Let's Let's see, there we go. So for my end, the key thing is focusing a bit on what Ursa we've done and what we're working on our part. So who's Ursa? So we are a global satellite intelligence infrastructure company that provides business and government decision makers access to on-demand analytic solution. So if you've been following on a little bit on Ursa before, you've seen that the infrastructure has been added on that one. It's because we built this to scale SAR network for our own use, but also extending it out to customers on that one. And that's one of the key things on that one. I'll talk about SAR, especially on that one, but we use all different Earth observation technologies as well on it. The good thing with SAR, it gives a great transparency where you can have access to information changes, things happening in the world without any limitations on geographic, political, or weather-related limitations from that part. So jumping into some of the cases here on that one. So when we look at the world and events and all that, and we talk about what satellite can do for us on that part, the good thing is we see everything, as you mentioned here. We can look at the world from outside there, from the world, from space, and looking down and seeing what's going on. And that's something we are looking at, like what kind of changes do we see from that part? In this example here is from Hurricane Ida in August 2021. And we were tasked with looking at levee operation and other activity, flooding changes as the hurricane passed through. And that's one of the key things when you look at optical image is you can't see as the storm goes through. Optical image is very good for verification, the human eye, your brain is very tied to what optical, but from our SAR, synthetic aperture radar is you can see through the storm, you can easily see while it's still the cloud coverage and that part. So in this one, we'll look for things that happen on it. Did we have a vessel that was moored? Did they get loose? Did something happen on that one? Did levees they put and did we see flooding or anything in places that shouldn't happen on that part? The good thing, nothing happened now. A lot of improvements been made there and on that one. So it was a good one, but it helps first responders, but also insurance companies to put efforts where it's needed. Because that's sometimes the challenge. You have a certain amount of resources. Where do you put them in? Can you get the head up on where to put resources and people on that one? Another example is a more impacting from a human nature, and on that one can combine with weather as well. And this one we participated in monitoring and providing information back to emergency crews and media outlets on what was going on with regards to an oil spill in Mauritius on this one. So this was a crude oil tanker that went on ground there on that one. And initially, as it went to ground for the first week, nothing happened. There wasn't anything going on from the oil spill, but then the oil spill came out. And if it's hard weather or it's hard to get out there because it's bad weather, it's hard to see where the oil is going, except for if you're reaching it from space. And with SAR, you can see oil slicks on the ocean. You can see and measure it and give that information to the emergency responders on that one, and how much resource to put in and where to focus everything on that part. So this is where using these resources is very critical in time and all that when events happening. So sometimes you want to make sure things doesn't happen as well on that part. So you can look at monitoring. In this example here is using Earth observation to monitoring pipelines. It could also be other type of critical infrastructure as well, but make sure that there's no encroachment on the right-of-ways. Are people building or things happening around a pipeline that shouldn't happen in this case? So this one here was a pipeline in Texas where we monitoring the right-of-ways and any construction and did it on a regular basis to see are there things happening, so the pipeline company can work on all of their routines and into their work from that part. Expanding on this one is, of course, if there is illegal tapping on pipelines, other things on that one, they can put environmental risk as well on that one, which is great. And I think in one of the previous sessions on this topic, There was mentioned use of IoT to monitoring and all that. By monitoring from space, and EO is giving transparency on our part. So one thing that probably Ursa has been known for a long time for a little bit also is measuring oil volume. And you can look, it's like oil isn't the thing we want so much of in the future. But if you're going to go into like an energy transition, you have to have an understanding how much is available and what's in the market from that point. Because it's all tied, end of the day, a little bit on the pricing and doing that transitions. So one thing we do, we measure how much oil is around the world, and on that one, there's no countries or boundaries or anything on that one. We go in and look and search for it, and using machine learning algorithms for that one. So if you're interested in the specific on it, I would suggest go on a website and check the blog post where one of our data scientists, Michael Allen, explains how we are looking for new tanks to discover it and all that, to find that and have an understanding of how much is happening in the world from that part. So wrapping everything up, the key thing for us is using Earth observation for transparency. You can't hide away on that part. And that's one of the key things on it. We can sit in Houston or somewhere else on that one, monitoring what's happening in the rest of the world. You can sit in Norway, Tromsø on that part. And that's one of the key things with Earth observation on that part. And making that available to people has been one of the key things from our end on that. And talking about making available, we're putting the data, the images and everything else out there on the different platform, AWS and all that, which is a key partner for us, where people can tap in and don't need to build their own infrastructure to access the data and images, and you can tap into what we've done on that part. Thank you. Robert, you're on mute.
Mr. Bell, you're on mute.
All right. Now I'm not on mute anymore. And if you're wishing that I were, well, that's a different topic and we'll take that up later. But I'm fascinated by Earth observation in terms of situational awareness. I mean, you call it transparency, but the military would call it situational awareness, and giving us our ability to understand, but also to respond, I think, is the lesson I took away. For me, in these cases you presented, what is the process inside Ursa that turns these set of SAR images into actionable, useful data for your customers? I mean, obviously it's slightly different in every state, in every case, but maybe you could just walk us through that briefly.
Yeah, so all of the things we do is based on our image catalog and the metadata access on that one. So we built up and tied in, and that's probably one of the unique. We don't own or operate any of the satellites, but we have built almost like an Airbnb of SAR providers and all that, where everyone is available in there. And that gives us much quicker response time if we need to task a satellite, because it's not about waiting for one specific provider. It's just which satellite is closest with the specific requirements we need for doing something analytics. And then the next thing we tap it into in that part is our advanced image processing. And that's where we pull measurements and information from the images themselves and look at that part. And then move on into the descriptive analytics. And that's where we do data fusion with other types of sources on it. And that's where we look for like an oil slick or identifying vessels or anything like that in that part. And of course, the end of these examples also is the market-specific insight. And that's putting it in context on that part. So some of these examples, like we're looking for ship-to-ship transfer on that one, which is completely legal to happen. It happens all the time. The question is, there is illegal activity happening, which is putting environment to risk when it's happening on that part. So we may not know if something is legal or illegal, but for us, it's more to bring it up for the people who goes in and take that data and insight and do something with it from that point.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And by the way, I mean, I don't get to monopolize this conversation. I just saw a chat from Tamara Bond Williams, our membership director. If you do have a question or a comment, you can throw it in there, and I hope that she will interrupt me or flag me and tell me about things that need to be discussed. My second question for you, Morten, is about is more general. I mean, this Earth observation business used to just be a government preserve, right? We were just basically doing it to spy on each other, to make a long story short. And now it is expanding enormously into different areas. I mean, the place you're sitting in, Houston, is obviously one of them. But what are Ursa's major areas of focus for product and market development?
No, it's a great question. As I mentioned, like the government's been using it a long time. They know what it is. That they have the whole workflow turned around it and all that since Carl Wiley came with technology back in the 50s, 60s on that part. So what we're doing right now is we're stepping more into the commercial market, which really kicked off for us last year on that one, to more focus on that from a strategic level on that. So some of the segments within that one is financial market, maritime, and critical infrastructure. That's where we're targeting a lot of focus these days on that one. And we go to them directly, to the end customers, and also work through partners. And that's one of the key for us to go to market with partners. And that goes into back putting things in context. We are SAR experts, we are EO experts, and we're expert in taking data points in fusion. So that could be AIS data, it could be RF data, it could be a lot of other things and combined together and get that information and insights from that one. But then we go directly or we work with the partners with putting that into a context from that point.
Interesting. Well, thank you. Listen, thank you very much. We'll be back with some more questions and discussion toward the end of this webinar. But next, we're going to turn to Guillermo Bosch from SatADSL, which is a company that is not specifically in the Earth observation business, but I think the Earth observation business depends a great deal on what it does. So, Guillermo, over to you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Sorry, just let me share my screen. Here's the screen. There we are. Okay. Great. Can you see my screen? Hello. Can you see my screen now?
We can. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, Robert, so thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar. Okay, to discuss this very interesting and important topic. Before I go to my brief presentation, I would like to say that climate change has two components, okay? One component is due to the natural course of events, something that we don't have any control of. But another component is the human activity on Earth, okay? So I think that in order to monitor climate change and then to allow us to be aware of the actions that need to be taken, I think that Earth observation and monitoring through satellite is essential. Let me go to. So just a few words about our company. Our company was founded in 2011 by 4 professionals that came from various sectors of the satellite and the space industries. In the early days, they saw an interesting unserved market in Africa, where the company would eventually become one of the major satcom providers in the region, okay, by distributing SCS Sat3 services. The problem at that time is that the hub operator had full control of the services provided to the end user. And so there was no value add possible from the distributor standpoint. So in order to differentiate our offering, we started to develop a platform that would take raw bandwidth from the teleport and provide the tools to design our own services to our own customers. So this platform eventually evolved into a full operations and business support system, which is based on the cloud, and that we actually launched in 2019 under the name of Nexus. So currently, we have about 28 teleports connected to it, supporting 32 different satellites. They operate on C, KU, and KA bands, and they provide connectivity today as we speak to more than 60 countries around the world. Other additional features to Nexus, such as enhanced security, for example, have been possible thanks to the contribution of the European Space Agency, which was instrumental into the development of our platform. So here in this slide, we see how the Earth observation business is organized from our perspective. So let's focus, for example, on the acquisition and dissemination layers at the bottom of the stack. In the first layer, we find the companies and entities that have launched their own Earth observation satellites. These satellites, pay attention to this, okay? These satellites are divided into imaging satellites, which we know of. I mean, they're very, very common, which include both optical and SAR, as Morten was explaining before. However, there are also the non-imaging satellites, okay, that are devoted to probing the atmosphere and measuring specific parameters on Earth. So whereas imaging satellites provide us with beautiful pictures of the Earth, non-imaging Earth observation satellites provide us with atmospheric data and specific ground data that are unthinkable, okay? And we'll give you a few examples. For example, GNSS radio occultation provides us with data about the atmosphere's temperature, pressure, and humidity. We have GNSS reflectometry that provides us with data about soil humidity. Onboard radar altimeter payloads provide us with a millimeter-grade measurements of any height on Earth. And this translates obviously into having detailed information about ice, soil, and ocean heights. Also, I think that also Morten mentioned before, AAS data, which is the automatic identification system on vessels. So if we put this in conjunction with satellite-borne signal triangulation, okay? And there are companies, emerging companies that are doing this. So they are triangulating UHF signals from ground and identifying exactly where the signal comes from. So you put that together with SAR imaging, that would provide, for example, us information about illegal maritime activities that could eventually turn into an ecological disaster. Okay, and I will give some examples after the Q&As. So all this massive amount of observations generate terabytes of data per day. So this huge amount of data has to be relayed somewhere from the satellites to the ground. So in order to for them to be pre and post-processed, and that pre and post-processed infrastructure will turn the raw information into analytics and insights. So in this context, for example, that we just said, our Nexus platform, which is it's in the light blue band that I put over there in between the dissemination and intelligence, is the missing link between satellite-based Earth observation, as we just described before in the acquisition area, and the GEO and the future LEO telecommunication satellites. For example, GEO satellites may contribute to Earth observation by providing local measurements of soil and atmospheric conditions through a global VSAT network, something that is being done today through IoT-specific satellites. But there's also a whole area that we will see in a few slides that can contribute directly through a network of VSAT infrastructure in the world. So, as we can see from this real representation, whereas Booking.com and Uber in turn virtualize the travel and local transportation businesses, Nexus, our platform, has effectively virtualized the access to global SATCOM resources and has thus become a one-stop shop for advanced SATCOM global services. And that is what we call the network of networks. So putting under one platform all the VSAT networks that are connected to it at the disposal of our customers. But let's go a little bit more in detail in the next slide. So in this picture, we see the Nexus possible implementation to add value to its potential users, okay? And that is, the potential users are the analytics and insight providers. So on the upper left-hand side, we have represented one of many LEO constellations that altogether generate terabytes of data per hour. So by post-processing the information and sending that information on an API, we can ingest that information into the in-marketplace of our platform, and then have for our customers a catalog available where they can browse and get the best, and they can get the the images and the Earth observation data that they want, okay? So simultaneously, then, those 28 teleports that are currently connected to Nexus, they also provide SATCOM services through VSAT connected to gateways that support in IoT and remote sensing devices. Those remote sensing devices can be devices to gather soil moisture, soil and surface temperature, humidity, and local weather stations, for example, measuring accumulated precipitation, air temperature, atmospheric pressure. All this point-based local data is then gathered at a POP, okay, through the VSAT network, and presented to the system users through the e-marketplace that they will see some examples in the next slide. So this is a screenshot, okay, where the end user can have Earth observation plus also the services from, just by picking the location with an associated service profile of each VSAT. The remote data is then presented to the system user, so they may include the local ground atmospheric information into the global analytics and insights products. And this represents the number of satellites that are presently connected to our platform. All these satellites are in the position to gather local IoT information and ingest that information into the platform, so it's available also for the system users. Today we are only going through GEO, but there are the plans into including also LEO SATCOM constellations into the platform. So in conclusion, as I said in my introductory page, okay, we're not able to control natural events, okay, that's obvious, but we're definitely in the position to make our contributions to conserve nature through a thoughtful use of resources and by monitoring the health of our planet. And I think the satellites have a major role in that big task, okay? So this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Guillermo. Thank you very much. Fascinating. Actually, every time I hear you, I learn something else about your company, about the industry. In a few words, I mean, you do a very complex set of things. What is the fundamental problem that you think Nexus solves for customers? Oops.
It's a complex problem today because there's no integration. What I see, there's no integration between, or there's little integration between the browsing of images, okay, that we have available today through many services providers, okay, and the integration of local data, local weather data, local IoT data. Those as you run weather forecasting services, for example, that take care of the big challenges of weather events in the atmosphere, but there is little integration of the local events. So by probing the atmosphere, by probing for example, the soil moisture, probing the heat of soil, and so forth, you have an extended data set, a local extended data set that is going to increase the probability of having a very detailed weather forecast. And a detailed weather forecast is essential for monitoring the atmosphere, monitoring the evolution of the atmosphere.
Okay, so ultimately what you're talking about is breaking down the satellite silo and saying it's part of a much larger picture.
Yes, yes. It's not a matter of only of Earth observation from satellites, but also Earth observation from ground.
Yeah.
So yeah, from Earth, yes. Integrate Bosch really
and we'll be circling back to Camporeale from Inmarsat to 5 minutes on what they're doing and how that contributes to the climate change issue. Marco.
Thank you very much. So hopefully I managed to, I'm sharing my windows here. Share here.
Maybe just turn it off. There we go.
Thank you very much. I will look into a specific sector and how satellite communication, satellite can actually help to accelerate the transition to a safer, more sustainable shipping. So the oceans today provide the primary means to conduct water trade. Vessel transport globally, supply chains of food, fuel, medicine, consumer goods. The shipping sector alone accounts for 80% of the global volume of trade, and alone is directly responsible for about 3% of the global greenhouse gases emission. So when we meeting the Paris Agreement in climate change, the shipping sector must cut its carbon emission, its emissions. But the beauty of the shipping is it is a global, is one single global sector. So we have the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, who has a 2050 ambition to reduce the shipping industry globally, global greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2050. And when it comes to just the carbon part of it, the carbon intensity of the emission, of 40% by 2030 and 70% by 2050. Definitely being a major contributor in fighting climate change. Now, obviously, to meet those requirements, there are on one side long-term development that is needed and short-term remedies. In the long term is about really provisioning zero carbon, fossil-free fuel. And to get there, we need to change the fuel infrastructure that, the fuel that those ships are using. Some of those ships are still using heavy fuel oil, HFO, which is the bottom, the residual oil. Once you in the chain of refinery, you have taken all the, the petrol and the jet engine. At the bottom, you get the fuel, and the heavy fuel that is actually burnt into those ships. But we know that removing carbon from the fuel chain is a very complex and lengthy process. It took 97 years to remove the tetraethyl lead, the lead, from the petrol supply chain. So we know that is a long-term solution. But what we know is that today, there are short remedies. So if you want to have less carbon, you just consume less fuel. And we know that there are a lot of digital solutions to actually reduce fuel consumption. There is evidence of fleet-wide fuel saving up to 20% just from changing how the crew on the bridge is handling the ship. Therefore, digital transformation, the digitalization of the ship and the supply chain of shipping is a key component when it comes to, in the short term, reduce the carbon emissions. But there are barriers. There are barriers to digital transformation in the shipping industry. There is lack of evidence of cost saving. The shipping industry is a very complex supply chain where you have an owner of a ship, a manager of a ship, a charterer who is chartering the ship to move goods back and forth. And if the owner is buying a piece of equipment to save fuel, a digital solution, then the one, depending on the charter party of the contract, maybe the charterer is actually having benefiting of cost saving. So lack of evidence for cost saving often becomes a lack of willingness to work on those solutions. Connectivity, cybersecurity is a ubiquitous challenge. Every ship, every vessel is an island. When you get on board the ship, every system is disjoint. It's not like on a car where every system is all connected with a CAN bus and all of the different peripheries are talking to each other. On a ship, most of the ships are actually completely, every system is completely isolated. And there is a lack of standardization in training. The crew is a very, international crew with a different level of training and different standards of onboard the ship. What are we doing as satellite telecommunication providers, as infrastructure providers, where we are evolving our infrastructure? On one side, obviously, one of the problems is capacity, connectivity. So we are evolving our infrastructure like we are in Inmarsat, we are doing with Orchestra and Elera, and we keep launching satellites that are like the I6 that we launched in December, which is now the largest and most advanced satellite ever launched to increase the capacity and the speed of our networks. But we are evolving our infrastructure, and we're actually getting inside the ships even further. We are building IoT platform to facilitate the deployment of solutions that need data from the sensors, from the ship, but keeping the ship manager and owners in control of their data. We are building hosting platform, like sort of the app stores that we are on our mobile, so that we can remote deploy application on demand on the ship without actually getting any technician on board. We are also deploying segregated bandwidth just for application in order to enable a more flexible and safer management of those applications, avoiding impact and actually the need of having the crew to work with connectivity. But we cannot do this alone. And those platforms are an enabler for those applications to actually then bring the fuel saving, bring the change in the industry. So we are building an ecosystem of partners whose applications they are enabled, accelerated our platform, and those applications are actually driving, and therefore the reduction of carbon and the global reduction of greenhouse gases. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Marco. I have just one question for you, which is, you did a very, I think, a great job of talking about specifically why this industry has been a slow adopter of a lot of solutions that we wish they'd adopt faster. And you talked about the fact that you're building out this ecosystem, both with your own technologies and with partners. Are you seeing yet signs that that's beginning to deliver what the ship owners need to be able to make the case?
Absolutely. So there is no way around actually collaborating and creating these places where the application providers and the infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure provider, and the ship owners, the ship manager can actually exchange data and work together. So we have a lot of cases, even my presentation was a brief copy and paste of different press releases. We have cases where we have seen fleet-wide reduction of fuel consumption in 1 year up to 20%. 20% fuel reduction means 20% less carbon emission. It's not easy.
And 20% higher profit, maybe.
Yes, well, absolutely. It's in general, there is an overall tendency to, if we reduce fuel consumption, there was, I read the other day, a very interesting article how by meeting the target of carbon intensity through digitalization, and actually we actually can reduce as shipping the global inflation actually 1.4% points, which is a very interesting reason to do this in the first case.
Well, I'd love to pick that up, but we're going to do something. We're just going to get one more point of view, and this one's coming to us by pre-recording. This is a video that was underwritten by the company KSAT, which is also in this business of data transmission for EO mostly. And this is about saving working on one of the most vulnerable places in the world from a climate change perspective, and that's the Arctic. Could we see that, please?
The Arctic, bitterly cold and crossed with blinding storms. Shrouded in darkness half the year, a place of legend where polar bears roam and gigantic icebergs plunge into the sea. But the Arctic is changing. The 6 years ending in 2019 were the warmest ever recorded. As our climate changes, ice sheets on land shrink and ice covering the sea breaks up. Frozen lands change shape as permafrost in the soil melts. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the Earth, and the changes are accelerating. While the rest of the world fears rising sea levels, the warming Arctic is opening new shipping routes that promise to cut travel times. New fishing grounds will help feed the world, and new mineral deposits may supply the next generation of electric cars and wind turbines. Yet the hazards of the Arctic remain. The more people who journey there, the greater the risks to life, health, and commerce. That's why a company called Kongsberg Satellite Services, or KSAT, is working to monitor Arctic weather and sea ice from space. They use a technology called synthetic aperture radar that can see through darkness and clouds and accurately measure features on the sea surface and terrain, like the gaps separating ice and sea. It gives governments, cruise lines, and energy companies timely information about icebergs and shifting coastlines to prevent shipwrecks and speed journeys. For more than 20 years, KSAT has been providing detection of oil spills from space, turning satellite images into actionable data in 120 minutes or less. That fast detection means less impact on the environment and lower costs for cleanup. Algae is a natural part of seawater, but when conditions are right, it can bloom into big, toxic masses. In 2019, an algae bloom off Norway struck fish farms, killing nearly 8 million salmon. KSAT is now supporting a satellite mission for a Norwegian university, testing the use of a technology called hyperspectral imaging to distinguish toxic blooms from harmless growth. KSAT offers a ground monitoring service called INSAR in partnership with European companies. It tracks movements in the Earth's surface down to the millimeter for scientists, governments, insurers, and investors. As the world keeps warming, seeing how the land changes over time will become critical to helping us adapt. And we need to adapt. In 2019, the extreme adventurer Mike Horn and polar explorer Borg Orsland began crossing the Arctic on foot. As they neared the end of their perilous journey, the ship that was supposed to pick them up got stuck in the shifting ice. 2 other explorers set out on skis from the ship to reach them, bringing food and supplies. Temperatures were high, and deep crevices began to open in the ice, separating the 2 parties. But, analyzing high-resolution satellite images, KSAT experts steered the adventurers to safety over a satellite phone. After 87 days on the ice, Horn and Orsland reached their ship, which finally broke free. Our planet will keep changing in unexpected ways in the years ahead. risk of extreme heat and cold, fierce storms and wildfires will increase. Rising to that challenge will take courage, ingenuity, and foresight. We will also need insights on our planet that can only come from satellite technology and innovators like KSAT. Satellite, the world's invisible, indispensable technology. Brought to you by Space and Satellite Professionals International with the support of KSAT. Additional support provided by Mansat.
Okay, and that is how the world looks from the point of view of KSAT, which is in some of the same spaces. So now we're going to have a chance to actually just have some discussion here with our three panelists. To kick that off, we have two specific questions actually from our listeners that I wanted to ask. Morten, this goes back to your very first presentation, which was asking a very interesting question. Given the times of oil glut, which these are kind of, I guess we're getting past that. A whole lot of oil got stored on ships, on what this person called ULCC ships, as opposed to standard tanks. Is that something that your data analysts have been able to look at, or is that beyond your reach?
So a lot of that is today measured or actually identified through broker reports, government reporting, other things on that one. But as a response back to there is a small part, there is sanctions activities, countries on that one that's not recorded. And there's illegal transfers and all that's not recorded. That's where SAR excels on that one. There's a way to do things on that one. So I'll just say one thing, stay put, and we'll do some exciting things on that area in the future. So. Excellent.
And there's also a follow-up question for Guillermo. There's actually a couple of them, Guillermo, and if I can sum them all up, they say, basically, are you trying to build the Amazon.com of Earth observation data? Because sometimes it sounds like that, so that you're going to somehow convince Maxar, Planet, and a bunch of other originators to just host their data with you. Is that where we're going? Oops, hello, you've frozen there for the moment.
Yes,
there you go.
I got frozen. Well, I couldn't hear the question. Could you please repeat?
The question is just, sometimes listening to your presentation, a couple of people asked the question, are you trying to become the Amazon.com for Earth observation data? Is Maxar, Planet, and all the other people out there going to play nice with you?
We are, our task is to become the Amazon.com of Earth observation and VSAT networks. As a matter of fact, we all started as an aggregator of VSAT hubs around the world. Okay, so there are all those hubs that I just mentioned. Is about 50 of them, 30, 35, 50 of them. They're already connected to the platform. Today, we're providing internet access to end users through the access of VSATs. Okay, but our idea is to use the same VSATs in order to put together an observation of ground events, okay, through IoT and remote sensing devices. So, in other words, you gather all the field information through the VSATs networks that we already have available. You feed them into the platform, and as I said before, you may have through APIs all the maps on all the other information that's coming from Earth observation. So let's take a look at a very good example, which is agriculture. Okay, how are agriculture services providers, specific service providers for the agriculture world today? They have to give you insights about your field. So they can do crop protection and insurance. They can do the sowing decisions, fertilization management, irrigation optimization, and so forth. In order to do this, you're not going to do that only by having one little nice picture from an Earth observation satellite and try to figure out when to sow your field. Okay, so you need a lot of information, local information, and information that comes from different areas. For example, you start with a base map. You start building a base map, for example, then you add the imagery into the base map, then you put the field bands into the stack, the soil map, the water bodies, the topography, the crop map, and the yield map. Okay, and on top of that, you put also weather forecasting information. By putting together all those tags all at once, the agronomist has, and then having local information from the examples that I gave about our platform, the agronomist has a huge amount of data in order to take their own decisions. Okay, right. Something that otherwise it would be impossible.
Well, agriculture is one of those areas where there's sort of seems to be an obvious upside. But yeah. For other panelists, I mean, when it comes to using Earth observation for investigating climate change, what sectors are you seeing where you think the industry will have the greatest impact? Morten, let's start with you.
So our focus has been like the transparency, and as mentioned in the speech here, it's like, yeah, looking at the changes in water levels, another thing is one of the key areas. But methane measurement is also an area that's important on it, on that part from a large scale view on it. That's what it is. You can find that and more on that. It goes back to you can't hide. And that goes to anything you look at, especially maritime, because it's like an oil spill, goes over the ocean pretty quickly, methane go up in the sky. Things that can impact people beyond the local environment is one of the key areas when you look at them tied to the population on that one. And there's great benefits from that.
Marco, how about you? Where are you seeing our industry having the greatest impact?
Well, definitely, I believe the shipping and working in the shipping, and I really believe shipping is the industry that has the largest capacity to improve. We have out there ships that are as old as 40 to 50 years old, and we have even a relatively new ship, 5, 6, 7 years old, who are still using old technology. There is a huge, immense capacity to actually use digital solutions using, VSAT telecommunication, as with our colleagues, digital imaging, to actually reduce the emission, and at the same time, have a accelerated transition to a safer industry. The example that Morten was presented in his presentation with the oil crude tanker crashing and grounding at the Mauritius all started because the story goes that the crew wanted to have access to connectivity, and they needed to get closer to shore in order to get a Wi-Fi. The story goes they wanted to have a party board, but the idea is that telecommunication, a VSAT connectivity, is a key component of safety and also a key enabler for the reduction of the greenhouse gas emission.
That's the part, and unfortunately we're getting low on time. We've got a whole bunch of great questions in the chat. I'm going to see if we can grab those and send them to you three, so you folks can respond to them. One thing that I'm constantly interested in climate change, is when you start sort of looking at things you can do, or you come up with a methane set. EDF is going to put up a satellite for the first time to capture that upwelling of, well, not the first time, the European Space Agency is doing it as well, but it's such a piece of low-hanging fruit, right? If you can the calculation, this comes from The Economist. Companies are losing between $100 and $400 in revenue that leaks, and what they're measuring begins at 25 tons. So this thing pays for itself 10 times over, but no company would ever act on it because it's invisible, and we're going to make it visible. And as Morten has put it, there's no place to hide. I just think there's so many other areas like this that are going to become blindingly obvious once we reveal them, that they will pay for themselves many, many times over. I mean, to sort of leave you with that, do you agree with that? And B, what's the, what example comes to mind? Morten?
Yeah, so it's one thing I would say is like when you saw the video from KSAT, actually one of our partners, and saying, you mentioned that algae hyperspectral satellite built by university on that one. On that one, it's like, go back 10 years and 20 years, you wouldn't see that on that one. I think that's some of the great thing with new space and all that, with a possibility to launch new satellites, special satellites, and all that, the amount of sensor technology and development on that one is really changing on that part. And it's also make it available. And that's for the difference also where you're playing in the ecosystem on that one. And a lot of data is being made available by government grants and other organizations on that one. And I think it's a very interesting area, like from that one. The question is, do we get people into it? Do we get the youth of the future engaged in STEM and taking part in this one? Because yeah, it's not gaming technology. It could be seen maybe not exotic, but that's probably the challenge we have is access that knowledge work of the future to take and yeah, run with it.
Well, at SSPI, we're working on that. We actually do partnerships with a number of student organizations where they're all space crazy, but they don't really actually know very much, almost nothing about commercial space and satellite. And so that's our job to let them know that these incredible opportunities that are out there. And by the way, climate change, biggest game ever, got to win it. Marco, how about you? Are you seeing other low-hanging fruit where we can make a serious impact on this issue? Because we know more.
Yeah, the 2019, 2020, 2021 have been a great change for the industry because of the pandemic. So the pandemic has accelerated the digitalization through an industry that sometimes is still having a compass on the bridge. And the things that we have seen are, for instance, training at sea. All of the seafarers, they have to be continuously trained in order not to end up in a risk, grounding offshore. And the old way of doing is having these, these seafarers being shipped around, flying around to training center, just having the telecommunication required to do training while they are at sea has been, reducing of a few percentage the global emission. Video conference, the opportunity to be doing remote surveys again at sea, so that the class society don't have to fly people on the ship to do an inspection. Remote piloting, it has been driven by the need of you don't want to send a pilot on board the ship due to COVID. But think about remote piloting. Today we need to take a boat with 4 people on board, because you need 2 pilots on board the ship. So you need to drive out, sail out, get close to a big tanker. They launch you a little ladder. 2 people have to go on board. And on the little, pilot ship, you need to have again 2 people, because the one sailing cannot be alone. Remote piloting, you remove the entire, the need for remote piloting from the entire equation, and people don't have to travel. People are in a safer place. So there are a lot of opportunities already happening now, low-hanging fruit that we are already taking in the shipping industry to reduce emissions.
Right, and what I like about what you said is that each one of those opportunities has multiple benefits, so that we can feel that we're doing something good for the world, but we can also, do something good for ourselves now. Last word to you, Guillermo.
Yes, okay, so you asked if there are something incredibly obvious once we can see them. There's something that we can see very often, which is earthquakes. So is there a way to predict earthquakes? I mean, today there are very big studies, and there is a data set that almost nobody speaks about because it's very well unknown, which is the measurement of total electron content of the ionosphere. It's called the TEC measurements. And through TEC, there are many studies at an academic level and also operational level, where they find that there's a correlation between a forthcoming earthquake and the modification of the total electron content of the ionosphere, okay? So there are some methods, which is called, of acquiring the TEC information, the total electron content information of the ionosphere, and by at least 100 scientific research that I know of, they're finding a correlation. So a correlation that when there's a change of TEC, okay, there may be a forthcoming earthquake. So if we manage to find the real correlation and continue with those studies, that's going to be a data set which is going to be incredibly important for providing advance notice by the local authorities to these sort of events.
Instead of waiting for the next big one.
Exactly.
I want to thank you all so much. You've illuminated so many different aspects of this and shown the interconnection between achieving something that we need to achieve, which is a reduction in carbon, or to learn how to respond better to the emergencies that are going to come our way through climate change, but at the same time opening up the opportunities that exist both for our industry, but also for our customers in carrying this forward. So thank you. It's been a really great hour, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a wrap up here. So Marco, Morten, and Guillermo, all the best to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.
So if you could, thank you, Matt, for doing that. We can go on to our next slide, or not, as the case may be. There you are. Coming up next on our Climate Sense, we're going to be wrapping up this campaign with an issue of the Orbiter. This is a place where we're going to compile all of the information and also share some new and perhaps surprising perspectives with you about this issue of climate sense, how through sensing applications we can contribute to both the understanding of climate, but also the solutions to carbon emissions, and not just sensing applications, but also SATCOM as well. Next slide, please. Coming up next for SSPI, we will very shortly, probably next week, we're just not quite sure about the date, announcing the 2022 inductees into the Space and Satellite Hall of Fame, which goes back to 1987 and has quite an amazing roster of people who have been honored in it. 15th of March, we'll be doing an induction ceremony online. And then at Satellite on March 22nd, we'll be having the Hall of Fame celebration, which is an invitational event largely for the sea level. Other things coming up in the near term are going to be our SSPI Mid-Atlantic chapter online event, which is going to focus on the power of storytelling in space. And remember, in space, no one can hear you scream. And then later on, then on the 16th, which is Wednesday of next week, we'll also be producing the New York Space Business Roundtable starting at 12 noon. And the title is Space SPACs. SPAC, Crackle, Pop? Well, we shall see. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found this to be an instructive and entertaining hour, and we look forward to having you join us next time. This is Robert Bell for SSPI.